It was just another quiet Tuesday afternoon at Sunnyside Diner on Maple Street. 78-year-old James Washington sat in his usual corner booth, sipping coffee and watching the world go by through the large windows. The weathered hands wrapped around his cup told stories of a lifetime, but to everyone else, he was just another elderly man having lunch alone. The peaceful scene shattered when two police cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers Martinez and Collins burst through the entrance, their eyes scanning the room with urgent intensity. They were responding to a call about an elderly black male who had allegedly been causing disturbances and threatening people at a nearby bus stop. Their gaze immediately fixed on James, who looked up from his coffee with genuine confusion. Without hesitation, they approached his table and ordered him to stand with his hands visible. James complied slowly, his movements calm despite the obvious bewilderment on his face. The officers weren't interested in explanations. Despite James's gentle protests that he'd been sitting peacefully in the diner for over an hour, despite the waitress Sarah stepping forward to vouch for him as a regular customer who never caused trouble, they proceeded with the arrest. Other customers watched in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. The cold metal handcuffs clicked around James's wrists as Officer Martinez roughly turned him around. This decorated war hero, this man who had served his country with distinction, was being treated like a common criminal based on nothing more than a vague description and the color of his skin. As they prepared to escort him to the patrol car, James maintained his dignity. He didn't resist, didn't shout, didn't cause the very disturbance they had falsely accused him of. Instead, he simply asked if they could at least tell him what he was supposed to have done wrong. The ride to the police station was filled with an uncomfortable silence. James sat in the back seat, his mind probably drifting to memories of a time when he wore a different uniform, when he served alongside men of all colors who judged him by his courage rather than his appearance. At the station, Officers Martinez and Collins brought James directly to Chief Rivera's office for processing. Chief Rivera, a man in his 50s with graying temples and tired eyes, looked up from his paperwork as they entered. He had seen this routine countless times before, but something about this particular arrest felt different. As the officers began to explain the situation, Chief Rivera noticed something that made him pause. There, on James's forearm, partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve, was a faded military tattoo. The chief's trained eye immediately recognized it as an 82nd Airborne Division insignia, weathered by decades but still unmistakably authentic. The chief's demeanor shifted instantly. His voice, which had been routine and professional moments before, now carried a note of respect and curiosity. He asked James about his service, and the elderly man's response sent shockwaves through the room. James Washington had served 3 tours in Vietnam with Echo Company, 2nd Battalion. He had been stationed near Da Nang from 1968 to 1971, during some of the most intense fighting of the war. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Chief Rivera's voice trembled slightly as he asked about Firebase Charlie, a battle that held profound personal significance for him. James's eyes grew distant as he recalled that terrible night in 1970, when mortar fire had turned their base into a hellscape of smoke, fire, and screaming wounded soldiers. James described how he had crawled through burning debris to reach a collapsed bunker where several soldiers lay trapped. Among them was a 19-year-old kid from Texas named Michael Torres, unconscious from smoke inhalation with shrapnel embedded in his leg. Without regard for his own safety, James had lifted the young soldier onto his back and carried him 200 yards through enemy fire to the medical station. The silence in the room was deafening as Chief Rivera processed this information. Michael Torres was his father. The man standing before him in handcuffs was the hero who had saved his father's life, the soldier his family had talked about for decades but could never locate. Tears welled up in Chief Rivera's eyes as he immediately ordered the handcuffs removed. Officers Martinez and Collins stood in stunned silence, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. They had arrested the very man who was responsible for their chief's existence. The apologies came in waves. Chief Rivera, usually composed and authoritative, found himself struggling for words as he personally removed the handcuffs from James's wrists. Officers Martinez and Collins, their faces flushed with shame, stammered their own apologies, knowing that their quick judgments and assumptions had led to this moment of profound embarrassment. But James Washington, this man who had every right to be angry, who had just experienced the humiliation of being arrested for a crime he didn't commit, responded with a grace that left everyone speechless. He looked at each officer, his eyes kind rather than accusatory, and spoke words that would echo in that police station long after he left. He talked about understanding, about how fear and assumptions can cloud judgment, about how easy it is to see uniforms and badges instead of the human beings wearing them. He spoke about his own sons and grandsons, young black men who lived every day with the knowledge that they could be judged by their appearance rather than their character. James didn't lecture them about racism or injustice. Instead, he talked about second chances, about learning from mistakes, and about the importance of seeing each person as an individual with their own story. He forgave them, not because what they did was right, but because holding on to anger would only perpetuate the cycle of mistrust and misunderstanding. Chief Rivera shared stories his father had told him about the soldier who saved his life, how Michael Torres had returned from Vietnam determined to make a difference in his community, how he had instilled in his son the values of service and protection. The chief realized that his entire career in law enforcement had been inspired by the actions of the man standing before him. As word spread through the station about what had happened, other officers gathered to meet James Washington. They listened as he shared stories from Vietnam, about brotherhood that transcended race, about sacrifice, and about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the person underneath. The real suspect in the original complaint was found an hour later, several blocks away, confirming what everyone now knew, that James had been completely innocent. But by then, something far more important had occurred. A moment of injustice had transformed into an opportunity for healing, understanding, and recognition long overdue. James Washington left the police station that day not as an arrested suspect, but as an honored guest. Chief Rivera personally drove him back to the diner, where Sarah was waiting with a fresh cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie on the house. The other customers, who had witnessed his arrest, now understood they had seen something extraordinary. Not just a mistake corrected, but a reminder that every person carries stories we cannot see. This incident became a turning point for the entire police department. Chief Rivera used it as a teaching moment, implementing new training protocols about implicit bias and the importance of thorough investigation before making arrests. Officers Martinez and Collins, deeply affected by their experience, became advocates for community policing and building relationships with the people they served. Sometimes it takes a moment of profound embarrassment to create lasting change. Sometimes it takes arresting a hero to remember that heroism comes in many forms and many colors. And sometimes it takes the grace of a man who could have demanded justice to show us what real justice looks like. Not punishment, but understanding, not anger, but forgiveness, not division, but unity. James Washington returned to his corner booth at Sunnyside Diner the following Tuesday, just as he always had. But now, when officers Martinez and Collins drove by on their patrol, they waved through the window, and James waved back. A friendship had been born from a moment of injustice, proving that even our worst mistakes can become opportunities for our greatest growth. If this story touched your heart and reminded you to look beyond first impressions, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories that matter. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of forgiveness and second chances. And tell us in the comments about a time when you discovered something unexpected about someone you thought you knew. Your story might just inspire